Before we start today's episode of The Square, I wanted to give you a little bit of context for what we're going to be talking about. Today's topic is going to be the Curiosity Report, which is one of several annual reports that Hugo puts out. Now, Hugo is the research and development arm of Corgan, and they really look at emerging technology trends and human behavior shifts. And the Curiosity Report was looking at wellness trends. And what's interesting is that was happening before the COVID crisis. Since the COVID crisis, these technology trends really haven't changed that much. They've just accelerated. And I'm talking about things like virtual spaces and touchless technologies, amongst a host of others. If you're looking at this on the video or the audio podcast, in the description, we're going to put a link to the Curiosity Report in its entirety for you to be able to view and to kind of absorb. Also later this month, we'll update those descriptions with the COVID best practices report that Hugo's going to be coming out with. So I encourage you to take a look at those, and let's get today's episode started. Welcome to this episode of The Square. Today we have Tania White, who is a design researcher, and Samantha Flores, who's the director of Hugo. Now, Hugo is the research and development arm of Corgan, and they are publishing the Curiosity Report, which is an annual report that's a deep dive into emerging technologies and really understanding where we're going with human behavior. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, of course.
Samantha, tell me a little bit about the Curiosity Report. It's a book full of ideas. Some are fantastic. Some are like extremely technical. Some of them almost seem straight out of science fiction. Where did the idea for this report come from?
Well, really, for the last few years, with each of our sectors, we've been looking at emerging technologies and how they're fitting in to human behaviors within our spaces that we design. And, we've been looking at these in the commercial area, in the aviation team, and we've never looked at it with all sectors involved. And we really wanted to get that cross-collaboration going so that we could really understand where those technologies are overlapping, how human behaviors are changing from one building to another, and really get that conversation of curiosity moving.
Got it. Okay. Now, you guys obviously have a passion for this kind of research and information. Tell me a little bit about where that comes from.
I'll take a stab at it. We are just really curious people. Tania and I sit right next to each other in the office, and we chat about going to space all day. We chat about what deep sea exploration might mean for architecture. And then we also ask each other, when you were walking down the street, did you feel a breeze? Did you smell a flower? What were you experiencing? So we're really kind of talking all day long about different types of experiences, and we're just interested in understanding the psychology behind it and interested in understanding how we can design with those things in mind as tools to enhance our experiences.
Tania, where do you think your curiosity comes from?
I would say maybe part of it is from my childhood. My dad was a big kind of NASA and sci-fi nerd, and so grew up just kind of watching those movies and talking about it, and I think it's just stuck with me as I've gotten older, but I don't like doing it by myself. I really enjoy doing it like sitting next to Sam or with friends. Just that person-to-person idea sharing is really fantastic and important to me.
Well, some of the ideas in this book are definitely right out of sci-fi. So it seems like kind of the overarching organization for this is DARQ Technologies, DARQ. So tell me what DARQ Technologies is.
So DARQ Technologies is really just an acronym for distributed ledger, artificial intelligence, extended realities, and quantum computing. And these are all the technologies that we're moving into. Some of them we already use on a day-to-day business aspect, but some of them we don't really know that much about because they're very much in development. So quantum computing is one of those where, there are a lot of possibilities with what it can do, but we don't really know so much about it. And so our job is to look at these technologies and really try to understand what it's going to do for architecture, how it's going to change the way that we design, how we work day to day, and then what it means for the end user at the end of the day.
So yeah, I think it was about last summer we were doing some research on emerging technologies, and we read a publication from Accenture that was discussing this post-digital era, which is what we're in now, which means being digital is no longer an option. It's just the way we do life. And that's because we've become very reliant on these 4 technologies that they refer to as SMAC. So social, mobile, analytics, and cloud. And we all intuitively understand what those are because they've become a part of our everyday lives. And that now we're transitioning into a post-digital era that is being ushered in through these dark technologies that, at some point, maybe 5, 10 years, who really knows, those dark technologies will more than likely become a part of our everyday life the same way we use Facebook and cloud computing and all of these other technologies.
So tell me a little bit about distributed ledger technology. What is that?
You want to take that one?
Yeah. So a lot of these technologies are rooted in computer science, which makes them, 1, abstract, and 2, a little bit outside of our specialty because we're coming from the field of design. And so we try to explain all of these at their kind of 30,000-foot level so that we could then start diving in a little bit deeper. So I'll just kind of start off with that. I am by no means a computer scientist. But essentially, a distributed ledger is a way of managing records, right? We used to manage records on sheets of papyrus, and then, 2,000 years later, we got Excel spreadsheets, and there are all these other ways that we record data like transactions, things like voting, birth certificates, etc. And a distributed ledger technology is a way of managing that data in a way that is a little bit more, I would say, it doesn't rely on a third party. So right now, if I go to the bank, that bank is operating as my third party broker that is facilitating a transaction, and there's usually a fee associated with it. A distributed ledger technology operates as an algorithm where 2 parties kind of buy in to the algorithm, and there are a set of kind of agreements that are being made, and you kind of flush out that third party system like a bank.
Okay. So AI is obviously something we've heard a lot about for several years. Sam, tell me a little bit about maybe some of the ideas in the Curiosity Report about where AI is going to be in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so out of the dark technologies, I think AI is the one that's going to disappear into our lives really, really quickly. And by that, I mean, we're going to be using it without even thinking about it. But when it's not there, when it's not available to us, we won't know what to do. Sort of like with the telephone and with the computer, with Google. So with AI, what we do is we're training computers through machine learning to help us understand and augment our own processes. And, one of my favorite ways to think about that is the reCAPTCHA whenever you're going onto a website and ask you if you're a robot and please identify these pictures. That reCAPTCHA is really, when it's asking, show me all the stop signs, it's helping us to teach autonomous vehicles. And that is so awesome to me because we're using our own human intelligence to then teach machines human intelligence so that they can augment all of our processes. So one way that artificial intelligence is actually going to help within the architectural realm as we look at it through the construction process. Part of that means that we're teaching robotics, human intelligence, to take on the tasks that are a little bit more mundane, so that us humans and us designers can take on those tasks that are more fit for us, that are designing, that are empathetic, that are catering to the user and the end user at the end, and focusing on human-centered design. So some of those may be, asking robotics to take on putting light switches in the walls and outlets in the walls, and then asking the designers to redefine the space to make sure that we're creating spaces that are physically and that are enhancing our well-being.
Okay, got it. With extended realities, obviously, I saw a lot about VR and AR, but there seems to be, that's obviously here already. What does that look like in the future?
So there are a lot of technologies at work with extended realities, and we're all pretty familiar with how some of them work. A lot of us have probably jumped into a virtual reality session. Some of us have probably used the maps on Google Maps with the AR and augmented reality experiences. One way that we're looking at how this is going to actually change the architecture space and the way that we design is through our education facilities. We see that, this really gives teachers an opportunity to take their children on field trips that maybe they wouldn't have been able to before because of budget reasons, or because taking kids, there's a lot of legality with that. One example of an extended reality experience that has always just kind of stuck with me is there was a class that was able to jump into a virtual reality experience and have a haptic experience with it. So they were able to go to the bombings in Syria and really explore on the ground what it felt like to be some of the refugees that had to leave Syria. And I think that it was really impactful for the students because they weren't just reading about it in a book. They weren't, trying to create those experiences in their minds that they have no context for. They were actually there and able to experience it. And when they reached out for someone, there was, a person that would grab their hand and they got to help them. So I think that it's really encouraging students to learn in a different way. And we are learning how to create the environments that can support that new method of learning.
And being able to use technology like that to create empathy, especially in kids, that's an awesome thing. All right, and then last but not least is quantum computing, which I understand is a large amount of data being computed in a relatively extremely quick amount of time. How does that have an effect on how we design buildings for humans?
Do you want to take this one, Tanya? I've taken the others.
I would take the explanation of quantum. I think that's kind of been the mode that we worked in. So I don't know do you want to take that one and I can describe it first and then, yeah?
Yeah, I can talk about how it applies to architecture.
Okay, perfect. So quantum computing is definitely the most philosophically challenging of the DARQ technologies to understand. The best way that I've heard it explained, and that we went and explained it in the Curiosity Report for y'all, is imagine a penny. And you flip it and you get a heads or a tail. And that would represent your classical computing, which operates in ones and zeros, which maybe y'all have heard about, kind of making fun of, computer cultures like ones and zeros. Those are called the bits, right? And it literally is translating information and in a language of ones and zeros. If you take that penny and then you spin it and it just never falls and it's continuously exploring both heads and tails at the same time, it never has to settle on something. It means that it can explore options rapidly, just exponentially. Like, we can't even really wrap our brains around this because we haven't seen it on the Earth yet. So yeah, what would take maybe a classical computer like millions of years to process, a quantum computer can do it much faster.
So wait, let me ask a quick question, Sam, before you jump in on the effective design. With it being that conceptual, is there a practicality to it? Like, when will there be a quantum computer?
Yeah, well, there already are quantum computers. So there is kind of a quantum battle going on right now between IBM, Google, Microsoft. Honeywell just got in the game recently. There have been some pretty remarkable advancements just in the last 6 months. The US government has just launched a quantum initiative, and a lot of Fortune 500 companies are investing in quantum computing. One interesting way that companies can kind of dabble in quantum without investing in the hard infrastructure and science, kind of labor behind quantum computing, is quantum computing as a service. So you don't have to, have the quantum computer on site and kind of launch a quantum R&D arm. You can just pay for it as a service, and that's what IBM Q Network is about. And there's companies like Delta just joined, and a lot of fintech companies. There's a lot. It's in the Curiosity Report.
Fair enough. So Sam, tell me a little bit of how this affects how we design buildings for people.
Yeah, so there's two really good examples that I like to lean on whenever I'm trying to describe how quantum compute will not only change the way that we work, but change the types of buildings that we design. And so the first one is a little bit harder to get your mind around, so I'll start there. We have been looking at a couple of different ways that quantum computing can change the molecular structure of carbon dioxide. And so what that means is it can change the structure so that it removes it basically from the earth or from the air. It basically sucks it out of the air. And you can do this right now. You can change that molecular structure, but you can only do that one atom at a time. With quantum computing, you can do that across a lot of different space. And so the theory right now is that architectural facades will be designed with quantum computing so that our facades are literally cleaning the air for us and helping us to reverse back time so that we're working past the effects that we've been seeing with climate change. And so that's one theory that we're able to do. We know that we can do it right now. We know that we can do it at a very, very slow pace and a very, very small scale. But we also know that we have to have quantum computing in order to achieve that goal. The second way that quantum computing, and probably one of my favorite ways that quantum computing is changing the way that we design, is, there's this example called parallel reality that IBM and Delta Airlines are working on together at Atlanta Airport. And what they've created is this digital screen or a digital experience that allows multiple people to be looking at this same screen, but only seeing their own information. So Brandon, you and I, and Tania, we could be standing side by side looking at one screen, and Tania will only see her flight information. I will only see mine. Brandon, you will only see yours. And the interesting thing is, say Tania's first language is Spanish, say yours is Japanese, and mine's English. Everything will be read to me in English. Everything will be read to you in Japanese. Everything will be read to Tania in Spanish because those are our preferred languages. Now, it does require quantum computing to do that. Their first models have been launched. They were launched this year for the Atlanta airport. I want to also expand on that once they're able to put that into motion in a very, very applicable way, we're going to start seeing that everywhere. We're going to start seeing our own information from our phones fed to us through these digital experiences and these digital atmospheres. And so it may even give us the opportunity to kind of put down the screen and access our information from surfaces all around the world instead of having our mobile devices. And that's what quantum can do for us.
And if I'll just add in really quick, because I think the example Sam gave is a great one that demonstrates how these DARQ technologies, and lots of other technologies, they work together in systems. They don't just work by themselves, but a quantum computing, imagine, an AI is getting its fuel is its data, and it's getting all of its data, but it takes 20 years to process all that data. Well, when you have something like quantum behind it, all of a sudden you are supercharging AI's ability to process data at a much faster, more real-time speed.
Absolutely. And then if you think about adding quantum computing to extended realities, I mean, that's even a different quantum leap. That's where you start thinking about how haptic can actually feel real, and how when we get into these extended realities, we're actually able to turn the corner. We're actually able to hug someone. We're actually able to open a door, and it all feels so real because of quantum computing and artificial intelligence and extended realities all coming together.
So one of the things that I loved about the Curiosity Report was how beautiful it was. I mean, the pictures and the graphics are gorgeous. But I know that throughout it, there's so many really specific and kind of detailed examples of all these different technologies. If you had to pick one project or element of the Curiosity Report, I know they're all your babies, but if you each had to pick one that was kind of your favorite, what would it be? Tania, you go first.
I have two.
Okay. All right, give us both.
Okay. I love the quantum data center. I just think, one, the visual really captures, it's not just a quantum computer. There's some reality and research embedded in there that a quantum data center will work in tandem with a traditional data center because that's how it works. And it really comes down to the fact that, we go back to these ones and zeros. A classical server is prepared to be very accurate because it only knows ones and zeros. And then a quantum is kind of all over the place. And from what I understand, the traditional data processing is kind of counterbalancing some of these more error-prone quantum results because quantum is kind of all over the place. And so I just like that, one, it looked just fantastic, but it was also rooted in a fundamental understanding of these two types of computing. And is that going to be exactly what a quantum data center looks like? We don't really know, but we went for it, and just shout out to the data centers team. You all did a really great job. I also really loved the AI for commercial software because I felt like that was just something that every sector could use, just to be able to run through literally hundreds of options really quickly with real world data, also being something that our clients would probably really appreciate as well.
All right, Sam.
Well, I mean, all of the, throughout the Curiosity Report, we did these Can You Imagine Ifs with each of our teams, and all of them had some incredible insights. And I hope that the people that worked on these projects walked away feeling like they were able to just explore the ends of the earth. Speaking of, my favorite one is probably commercial space travel and looking at spaceports. And really, I get the chills talking about it because when we did the research, we found that commercial space travel is not that far away. We also found that we have several throughout the U.S. that are available for commercial space travel. We just don't do it yet. We send cargo mostly to the space station. And so our spaceports team really took a deep dive into what it would take to make these spaceports feasible for commercial space travel. How long is that time until we get there? And then also they took a look at, quarantine facilities from, going into space and then coming back from space. And that's something that we're taking into our designs today. We're learning so much from what we did with the spaceports research, and we're able to take it into the research that we're looking at today with, looking at airports post-COVID. And so I think that there was a depth of knowledge that was reached in that project that was just incredible to surface. It works with all of, our market sectors at Corgan. We are looking at educational facilities within the spaceports realm. We're also looking at, healthcare facilities in a completely different way. And so I really appreciated the depth of knowledge that was brought to the table with that project. And also they just kind of took it, to another level with working in space.
Thank you both for joining us in this episode of The Square. If you're listening in the audio-only version, you won't have been able to see some of the images that we put up to show that we got out of the Curiosity Report. But make sure you check out the video version, as well as we will put a link to where you can access the Curiosity Report and read for yourself about some of these incredible technologies. Thanks again to both of you, and we'll see you next time on The Square.